April 6, 1945. Reims, France. SHAEF Forward Headquarters. Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery is reviewing intelligence reports over morning tea. The ritual is methodical, precise, very British. His aide, a young captain named Williams, enters the room carrying a dispatch folder marked urgent. Montgomery glances up, slightly annoyed at the interruption. Williams hands him the top sheet. It's from 12th Army Group, 3rd Army Sector. Montgomery reads it once. His expression doesn't change. He reads it again. Slowly, he sets down his teacup. The porcelain clinks against the saucer. This says Patton has liberated 4,000 prisoners, Montgomery says, in 24 hours. Williams nods. Yes, sir. 4,000. Yes, sir. And, sir, that was 2 days ago. The current count is over 7,000. Montgomery stares at the paper. 7,000 Allied prisoners. Freed in 3 days. By George Patton, if you want to see how one general's refusal to follow orders saved 32,000 lives and drove the Allied command to the edge of collapse, hit that subscribe button and join the WW2 elite community. We bring you the untold stories that textbooks leave out. The stories that reveal not just what happened, but why it mattered. Now let's see exactly what happened when Patton decided rules didn't matter anymore. Montgomery stands and walks to the large situation map, mounted on the wall. His chief of staff, Brigadier General Charles Richardson, enters the room. He's carrying more dispatches. His face says this is about to get worse. Show me, Montgomery says. Richardson steps to the map. He marks positions with a grease pencil. Ohrdruf, Langensalza, Mühlhausen. Each mark represents a liberated camp, a cluster of marks, all in 3rd Army's sector, all liberated in less than a week. 3rd Army advanced 63 miles in 6 days. Richardson says, from the Wera River to beyond Erfurt. Montgomery's finger traces the line 63 miles. He looks north to his own positions. Bremen, Hamburg. His 21st Army Group has advanced 18 miles in this. How many prisoners have we liberated? Montgomery asks. Approximately 2,800, sir, as of this morning. Montgomery does the calculation in his head. Patton's 3rd Army, 7,000 prisoners in 3 days. His own forces, 2,800 in 6 days. With equal manpower, his forces are actually closer to the major POW camps near the Elbe. The mathematics are undeniable and humiliating. This can't be right, Montgomery says. He's supposed to be consolidating positions along the Wera. How is he 60 miles beyond his stop line? It's confirmed, sir, Richardson replies. Chef Intelligence has verified the numbers. Multiple camps. 3rd Army is moving so fast they're overrunning POW columns on forced marches. The Germans are evacuating camps ahead of the Soviet advance. Patton's units are intercepting them on the roads. Montgomery studies the map. The POW liberation sites form a diagonal slash across Thuringia. It's not methodical, it's not organized, it's chaos on a map. But it's effective chaos. That's not possible, Montgomery says quietly. You can't advance, fight, and conduct humanitarian operations at this tempo. The logistics alone, the fuel consumption, the maintenance requirements. Richardson meets his commander's eyes. Apparently, sir, you can. The room falls silent. Outside, staff officers move through corridors. Typewriters clatter. Telephones ring. The machinery of command continues, but in this room Bernard Montgomery is confronting an uncomfortable truth. George Patton is doing the impossible. Again. What's his casualty rate? Montgomery asks. Richardson checks his notes. Lower than projected, sir. 3rd Army is meeting scattered resistance. Most German units are withdrawing or surrendering. The Wehrmacht is collapsing. And he's maintaining offensive operations while conducting these liberations? Yes, sir. Nove Corps is engaging near Erfurt. XS Corps has reached Hof. 8 Corps is moving on Leipzig. Simultaneously, each corps is diverting units to secure camps as they're discovered. Montgomery turns back to the map. The scale of the operation is staggering. Patton isn't choosing between military objectives and humanitarian operations. He's doing both. At the same time, at maximum speed. And Montgomery hasn't seen the latest dispatch yet, the one about Patton's demand to keep going, all the way to Czech. According to Omar Bradley's memoir, A General's Life, this moment marked the beginning of what he called the final Patton crisis. The war in Europe was ending. Victory was certain. The strategic objective was clear: link up with Soviet forces, secure Germany, end the war. Simple. Except George Patton didn't do simple. Let's go back 7 days, April 3rd, 1945. Third Army is positioned along the Wera River. The official directive from Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force is clear. Consolidate positions. Prepare for junction with Soviet forces advancing from the east. Coordinate movements. Don't create diplomatic incidents. The war is won. Don't mess it up. Patton reads the directive in his command post. His staff watches him. They know that look. It's the look that says he's about to ignore all. Gentlemen, Patton says, we're going east. Maximum speed. Every camp we find, we liberate. Every POW column, every German unit that gets in our way, we destroy. Questions? His Chief of Staff, Major General Hobart Gay, speaks carefully. Sir, the directive says consolidate. The directive doesn't say stop, Patton replies. It says prepare for junction with Soviet forces. We'll be prepared. We'll prepare while moving. Any other questions? No one's been good. Issue orders. 12 Corps advances on Erfurt. XX Corps takes Hof. 8 Corps moves toward Leipzig. Reconnaissance elements push as far forward as possible. I want to know where every camp is. Every forced march route, every concentration of prisoners. We find them, we free them. Simple. Within 72 hours, 3rd Army units liberate Ohrdruf concentration camp. It's the first camp liberated by American forces. What they find there shakes even hardened combat veterans. Eisenhower, Bradley, and Patton tour it together on April 12. Eisenhower orders every unit in the area to tour the camp. He wants soldiers to see what they're fighting against, what they're fighting to end. But by then, Patton's units have already liberated. The tempo doesn't slow, it accelerates. At 21st Army Group headquarters in northern Germany, Montgomery is watching this unfold with growing concern. His operations are progressing methodically. Bremen is under attack. Hamburg is being encircled. Camps are being liberated as positions are secured. Everything but the numbers coming from 3rd Army are impossible to ignore. April 5th. 3rd Army reports 3,200 POWs liberated. April 6th, 5,800 total. April 7th, 7,400 total. Montgomery's operations officer delivers the daily intelligence summary. Sir, 3rd Army is now reporting contact with Soviet forward elements near Erfurt. What? That's impossible. They can't have reached the Soviet advance already. Apparently they have, sir. Reconnaissance elements, not main body units. Montgomery stares at the map. The Soviets are advancing from the east, the Americans from the west. The agreed meeting point is the Elbe River. Patton's reconnaissance units shouldn't be anywhere near Soviet forces yet, but they are. Get me General Bradley on the telephone, Montgomery says. April 8, 1945. The secure telephone call that everyone knew was coming. Montgomery sits at his desk. The operator connects him to 12th Army Group headquarters in Wiesbaden. Omar Bradley takes the call. Omar, your 3rd Army is operating entirely outside the agreed boundary lines, Montgomery says. His voice is controlled, clipped, every word precise. Eisenhower's directive was clear: consolidate and prepare for junction with Soviet forces. On the other end of the line, Bradley leans back in his chair. He knew this call was coming. He's been dreading it. Not because Montgomery is wrong about the facts. He's right. Patton is exceeding his boundaries. But Bradley also knows something Montgomery doesn't want to acknowledge. George is liberating concentration camps, Monty, Bradley replies carefully, and rescuing our own men, thousands of them. At the expense of organized advance, Montgomery counters. He's creating a salient, exposing his flanks. This isn't sound doctrine. It's grandstanding. It's the same reckless behavior we saw in Sicily, in France. He treats the chain of command as advisory. Bradley's jaw tightens. He's defended Patton for 2 years. Through Sicily, through the slapping incident, through Normandy, through France. And he'll defend him now. Is it grandstanding? Because, while we're talking, he just liberated another camp at Langensalza. 3,000 more POWs, British, American, French. When exactly should I tell him to stop rescuing Allied prisoners? There's a pause on the line. Montgomery's voice, when it comes back, is colder, more rigid. Don't be obtuse. The issue is coordination. His advance disrupts the entire front. My forces are securing objectives methodically while he tears across. Your forces are stuck at Bremen, Bradley interrupts. George is at Erfurt. Those aren't opinions, Monty. Those are map coordinates. Those are facts. My forces are engaged with significant German resistance. Bremen is defended. Hamburg is defended. We're conducting proper combined arms operations. And George is liberating prisoners while destroying German resistance at the same time. Should I tell him to slow down? Should I tell him that proper procedure is more important than saving lives? The silence stretches. 10 seconds. 15. When Montgomery speaks again, his voice carries the weight of command and frustration. I want this raised with Eisenhower. Third Army is out of control. This isn't about saving prisoners. This is about Patton doing whatever he wants, whenever he wants, and expecting everyone else to adjust. It's unprofessional, it's dangerous, and it sets a precedent that will haunt this command structure. Bradley's voice goes flat. I'll pass along your concerns, Field Marshal. The line goes dead. Bradley sets down the receiver. He sits in silence for a moment, staring at nothing. His aide, Major Chester Hansen, enters the room. Everything all right, sir? Bradley looks up. Monty wants Patton reined in. He's not wrong about the tactical situation. George is creating risks, but he's also saving more lives in a week than most armies save in a month. He picks up his pen and writes in his diary. The entry, published decades later in his memoir, reads, Montgomery complained bitterly about Patton's freelancing, called it unprofessional and dangerous. I wasn't about to tell George to slow down when he was saving lives. Some things matter more than procedure. But Montgomery isn't wrong about the risks. Patton is creating a salient. He is exposing flanks. He is operating beyond his supply lines. He is ignoring boundaries. Every military principle says this is dangerous. Every every freed prisoner says it's worth it. And Patton isn't slowing down. At Patton's headquarters, the operations tempo is relentless. Staff maps are updated hourly. Reports flow in from divisions, regiments, battalions. Every report brings news of another camp, another column, another 1,000 prisoners. Major General Hobart Gay, Patton's chief of staff, approaches him on April 9th. Sir, we're stretching supply lines thin. Fuel consumption is above projections. If we maintain this tempo, we'll need emergency resupply within 48 hours. Patton doesn't look up from the map. Then request emergency resupply. Sir, Schaeff may deny it. We're operating beyond approved boundaries. Now Patton looks up. Hobie, in the last 6 days, we've freed 10,000 Allied prisoners. 10,000. Do you think Schaeff is going to deny fuel to an army that's saving that many lives? Sir, Field Marshal Montgomery has complained to General Bradley. I know. I don't care. We keep moving. We keep liberating. Supply will catch up. It always does. Gay nods. He knows better than to argue. Yes, sir. 12 Corps reports another camp discovered near Mulhausen. Estimated 1,500 prisoners. Send a combat command. Secure it. Free them. Next, XX Corps is approaching the Czech border near Cheb. Patton's finger traces the map. The Czech border. Beyond that, Prague. He knows the political situation. Prague is supposed to go to the Soviets. Churchill wants it. Stalin demands it. Eisenhower has promised it. But Prague is 48 hours away, maybe less. Request permission to continue into Czechoslovakia, Patton says. Gay hesitates. Sir, that will be denied. Probably. Request it anyway. April 10th, 1945. Third Army forward elements reach the Czechoslovakian border near Cheb. That's 100 miles beyond their authorized advance. 100 miles. The request to continue to Prague goes up the chain of... Schaeff denies it within hours. Stay on your side of the line. Let the Red Army take Prague. Political agreement. Strategic necessity. Direct order. Patton's response is recorded by his aide, Colonel Charles Cobham, in his diary. Patton looks at the map. He looks at his staff. His face is tight with frustration. I'll tell you what, Charles. We could be in Prague in 2 days. 2 days. And if someone wants to court-martial me afterward, But those men in the camps can't wait for politics. They can't wait for Stalin and Churchill to decide who gets credit for liberating what. Codman says nothing. What can he say? But Ike made it personal, Patton continues. He called me directly, not through Omar. He called me, and when Eisenhower makes it personal, you don't cross that line. He doesn't go to Prague. Not because of the order, because Eisenhower personally calls him and makes it clear this isn't negotiable. This is political. This is alliance politics. This is the future of Europe. But the attitude? That attitude is pure Patton, the willingness to risk court-martial to save lives. That's who he is. At SHAEF headquarters in Versailles, the situation is approaching crisis. Eisenhower's chief of staff, General Walter Bedell Smith, writes in his diary on April 12th, "Ike is furious. Not at Patton's results. 15,000 men freed. That's extraordinary. That's beyond what anyone thought possible. But at the diplomatic night, Churchill is calling daily, Stalin is asking questions through Zhukov, and Monty won't shut up about proper procedure. The diplomatic pressure is real. Soviet liaison officers are questioning why American forces are approaching the agreed demarcation line prematurely. Are the Americans trying to take territory promised to the Soviet Union? Is this a political maneuver? Is this a betrayal of Yalta? Eisenhower has to assure Stalin personally that no, this is not a betrayal of Yalta. This is not an attempt to grab territory. This is just Patton being Patton, moving fast, liberating camps, saving lives. Stalin, according to Soviet records, replies, "Your General Patton does not appear to understand the meaning of boundaries. Perhaps you should explain them to him with smaller words." Eisenhower's response isn't recorded, but we can imagine it. We can imagine the Supreme Commander of Allied forces trying to explain George Patton to Joseph Stalin. Good luck with that. Meanwhile, at 21st Army Group headquarters, Montgomery is watching the prisoner liberation numbers with growing frustration. His forces are liberating camps too, methodically, systematically, with proper coordination, with logistical support, with combined arms integration. By April 14th, the total is 4,200 Allied POWs liberated by 21st Army Group. That's significant. That's substantial. That's 4,200 human beings who are but Third Army's count is now 16,800. That's when Montgomery's Public Affairs Office issues a press release. It highlights the systematic liberation of camps in northern Germany. It emphasizes the organized, coordinated approach, the professional execution, the proper integration of humanitarian operations with military objectives. The press release is factual, accurate, professional. Everything Montgomery does is professional. And then the American press gets hold of it. Stars and Stripes, the official U.S. military newspaper, runs the numbers side by side. The headline reads, "Patton's Third Freeze, 17,000 in 10 days. The subheading, "British forces liberate 4,200 in same period." It's not meant to be competitive. It's just facts. But facts have a way of creating narratives. Montgomery cables chef Public Affairs. This is unseemly competition. This is not the British way. Can we please stop turning the liberation of prisoners into a race? Can we please focus on the mission instead of the headlines? The response from SHAEF is polite but firm. These are factual reports. We can't suppress factual information. The press is doing its job. The numbers are what they are, but it's not a race. Patton isn't competing with Montgomery. He's not trying to make Montgomery look bad. He's competing with time. Every day in a camp is another day prisoners might die, might be executed as the Reich collapses into chaos. Speed isn't grandstanding. Speed is life-saving, but Montgomery sees it differently. He sees Patton making him look slow, making him look cautious, making him look like he doesn't care as much about prisoners. And that's not fair. Montgomery does care. His forces are saving lives too. 4,200 lives. That matters. That's 4,200 families who will see their loved ones again, but 16,800 is more than 4,200. Mathematics doesn't care about fairness, but the real explosion is still coming, because Patton isn't done. Not even close. April 15th, 1945. Third Army suddenly accelerates eastward again, toward the Moldy River. That's just 25 miles from the agreed Soviet meeting point on the Elbe. Simultaneously, reconnaissance elements are reported near Pilsen, Czechoslovakia. SHAEF headquarters tries to get clear answers. Where exactly is Third Army's main body? Where are the division command? What are the current objectives? What's the operational plan? Patton's communications are unreliable. Suspiciously so. Radios are supposedly experiencing atmospheric interference. Telephone lines are supposedly damaged by retreating German forces. Updates are delayed. Position reports are vague. 12th Army Group reports, Third Army engaged with scattered Wehrmacht units near Leipzig, exploiting opportunities as they develop. British aerial reconnaissance reports, American columns observed 30 miles beyond reported positions. Multiple axes of advance. Appears to be deliberate exploitation toward Elba. Soviet liaison officers report, American advance elements observed at coordinates suggesting movement toward Prague axis. Request clarification of American intentions. Chef demands clarification. Patton's headquarters responds with a message that becomes infamous: pursuing fleeing enemy. Liberating camps as encountered, will update positions when fluid situations. Fluid situation is Patton's speak for "I'm doing what I want and I'll tell you about it later." At Montgomery's headquarters, the field marshal is reading the April 15th intelligence summary. His hand tightens on the paper. His face is rigid. "He's doing it again," Montgomery says to Richardson. "He's deliberately advancing beyond orders and asking forgiveness later, except this time he might start a war with the Russians. Does he understand that?" Richardson chooses his words carefully. "Sir, Third Army has liberated another 2,000 prisoners in the last 24 hours. The camps near Hof, mixed nationalities, including approximately 400 British personnel." Montgomery sets down 400 British soldiers going home because Patton moved fast. "I'm not questioning the value of the liberations," Montgomery says quietly. "I'm questioning the method, the disregard for orders, the precedent it sets. What happens when every field commander decides operational plans are optional?" "Yes, sir, but I can't say that publicly, can I? Because then I'm the one who's against liberating prisoners." Richardson says nothing. There's nothing to say. At Chafe, Eisenhower is on the phone with Bradley. April 16th. Eisenhower's voice is tight with controlled anger. "Where the hell is he, Omar? And don't tell me fluid situation. I need coordinates. I need objectives. I need to know what George is actually doing so I can explain it to the combined chiefs, to Churchill, to Stalin. Where is Third Army's main body?" Bradley's response is careful. "George is liberating camps and chasing Germans. He's exploiting the collapse of Wehrmacht resistance. Last report, another 2,000 POWs freed near Hof, mixed nationalities, significant number of Soviet prisoners included." "Amar." "I know, Ike, but he's saving lives at a rate nobody thought possible." There's silence on the line. Then Eisenhower speaks again, his voice quieter. "I know he is, and I'm proud of that. I'm proud of what Third Army is accomplishing. But he's also creating a political nightmare. Do you understand that? Stalin is asking questions, Churchill is asking questions, and I don't have answers because your Third Army commander won't tell me where his forces actually are. I'll get you updated coordinates within 6 hours, Ike. 6 hours. Make it 3. The line goes dead. In London, Winston Churchill is in a war cabinet meeting. The minutes record his statement. General Patton appears to be operating in a reality where the chain of command is merely advisory. While I appreciate the liberation of British personnel, I must question whether this operational independence sets a precedent we can sustain in future combined operations. That's diplomatic language for Patton is out of control and someone needs to fix it. But here's the thing. He's not out of control. He's precisely in control of his army, of his tempo, of his mission, of his objectives. He's just not in control according to anyone else's definition. The definition of in control depends on what you're trying to control. Montgomery tries to control risk. Patton tries to control outcomes. Those are fundamentally different approaches. And then the reporters find out what Patton said to Eisenhower. On the record, at a press briefing on April 17th, a correspondent from the New York Times asks Patton about criticism that his advance is too aggressive, too risky, that he's creating unnecessary complications for Allied command. Patton's response becomes front-page news. Some people think liberating camps should be done carefully, methodically, by the book. I think it should be done fast, before anyone else dies in those hellholes. We can debate procedure after we've saved lives. We can debate doctrine after those men are home. But while they're still in those camps, still on those forced marches, I'm not interested in debate. I'm interested in speed. That quote lands like a grenade in Allied headquarters across Europe. Because how do you argue with it? How do you tell a general he's wrong for saving lives too quickly? How do you criticize a man for prioritizing human beings over procedure? Montgomery reads the quote in the London Times over breakfast on April 18th. He sets down the newspaper. He says nothing. His aide watches him carefully. "Sir, I have no comment," Montgomery says quietly. What can he say? That Patton should slow down? That saving lives should be done more methodically? That procedure matters more? He can't say any of that. Not when British soldiers are among those being freed. By April 18th, the numbers are staggering. Third Army has liberated over 32,000 Allied POWs. 32,000 in 15 days. They've advanced 140 miles. crossed 6 major rivers, liberated Buchenwald concentration camp on April 11th, Flossenburg on April 23rd, dozens of subcamps, work camps, forced march columns intercepted on roads. The logistics officers at Shire run the calculations. The fuel consumption alone should have been impossible to sustain. The maintenance requirements should have slowed the advance significantly. The combat operations combined with humanitarian operations should have reduced overall tempo. But somehow, Third Army managed it all simultaneously. The operation isn't just unprecedented, it's theoretically impossible. Every logistics manual says you can't do this. Every tactical doctrine says you can't maintain this tempo. Every operational guideline says you can't combine offensive operations with large-scale humanitarian missions. Except Patton did it anyway. At 21st Army Group, the total is now approximately 12,000 POWs liberated. That's significant. That's substantial. That's a major humanitarian achievement. Montgomery's forces secured Bremen on April 26. Hamburg surrendered May 3rd. Major objectives accomplished. Resistance overcome. Prisoners liberated. As positions was everything by the book, everything professional, everything proper, but it's not 32,000, and everyone knows it. The newspapers know it. The soldiers know it. The politicians know it. Montgomery knows it. April 20th, 1945. Chef Main Headquarters, Versailles. Eisenhower has summoned senior commanders for an operational review. The war is ending. Final phase operations need coordination. Soviet junction is imminent. Political boundaries must be respected. Occupation zones must be prepared. Montgomery attends. Patton attends. Bradley attends. British officers. American officers. The conference room is full. According to Bradley's memoir, Patton walks into the room, radiating smugness. He knows what he's accomplished. He knows everyone else knows. He's not apologetic. He's not defensive. He's satisfied. Montgomery's expression is stone. Professional. No emotion visible. The meeting covers logistics, supply lines, occupation zones, coordination with Soviet forces, redeployment plans for the Pacific, administrative details of the German surrender process. And then, inevitably, Eisenhower brings up Third Army's operations. The elephant in the room. The thing everyone's been thinking about but nobody wants to discuss first. General Patton, Montgomery begins before Eisenhower can speak, his voice formal and precise. Your army's advance has been remarkable. The numbers are extraordinary. However, it has also created significant complications. Diplomatic complications with our Soviet allies, logistical complications within the theater supply system, command and control complications for Chef Headquarters. Patton meets his eyes directly. It's also freed 32,000 Allied prisoners of war, including 4,000 British soldiers. I assume that's not a complication, Field Marshal. The room goes quiet. Everyone knows the history between these two men. Sicily, Market Garden, the race across France. 2 years of tension. Montgomery's jaw tightens slightly. Don't be flippant, General. The point is adherence to operational plans. We can't have individual commanders operating independently of theater-wide coordination. It creates chaos. Field Marshal, with respect, Patton says, his voice calm but firm. While you were adhering to plans, my men were cutting locks off POW cages. While you were coordinating, my soldiers were loading prisoners onto trucks. While you were following procedure, I was bringing 4,000 British soldiers home to their families. I'll take that trade every single time. Your grandstanding... Gentlemen, enough. Eisenhower's voice cuts through the room like a blade. He turns to Patton. His expression is unreadable. The Supreme Commander studying one of his most difficult subordinates. George, you drove everyone in this headquarters insane for 2 weeks. You ignored boundaries, exceeded authority, operated beyond approved objectives, and made my life a living hell with both Churchill and Stalin. Do you understand that? Patton sits quietly. His expression is serious now. Yes, sir. I understand that. You also saved more lives in 15 days than any single operation since Normandy. Eisenhower pauses. Lets that sink in. Lets everyone in the room process it. Your after-action report better be exceptional, because I'll need it to justify this to Washington, to London, and to Moscow. He turns to Montgomery. Monty, George's methods are unorthodox. They're frustrating. They drive you mad. They drive me mad. They violate every principle of staff coordination we've tried to establish in this theater, but 32,000 men are alive and going home because he doesn't wait for perfect conditions, because he acts when others plan.
Montgomery's face is rigid.
After a long pause, he speaks carefully. I don't dispute the results, Supreme Commander. The liberation numbers speak for themselves. I dispute the precedent. I dispute the message it sends about chain of command. I dispute the implication that following orders is somehow less valuable than individual initiative. Noted, Eisenhower says. And you're not wrong. But George isn't wrong either. Sometimes the mission changes faster than the orders. Sometimes you have to trust field commanders to see opportunities that headquarters can't. That's why we give them armies instead of checklists. The meeting continues. More operational details, more administrative matters. The tension in the room never fully dissipates. When it ends, Montgomery leaves without speaking to Patton. Patton doesn't try to engage him. There's nothing to say. The numbers said it all, but the story doesn't end there. Because that evening, something happens that neither man expects. Officers gather at the club in Versailles. It's a rare moment of relaxation. The war is ending. Men who've carried the weight of command for years can finally see the finish line. Conversations happen. Guards come down slightly. British journalist Alan Moorhead is there. He's covered the war from North Africa through Europe, El Alamein, Sicily, Normandy, the liberation of Paris. He's respected, trusted, known for fair reporting. He sees Montgomery standing alone at the bar, drink in hand, looking at nothing in particular. Moorhead approaches carefully. Field Marshal, Moorhead says, "May I ask for your comment on Third Army's liberation numbers for the historical record?" Montgomery looks at him. For a moment, Moorhead thinks he won't answer, thinks he'll give the standard no comment or redirect to official chef statements. Then Montgomery takes a sip of his drink. His voice, when he speaks, is quiet, almost resigned. The voice of a man who's arguing with himself as much as anyone else. "You've made your point, Patton. You've certainly made your point." Moorhead writes it down. The quote appears in his dispatches. It's picked up by other journalists. It spreads through military circles, through newspapers, through history. "You've made your point." 6 words. That's all. 6 words spoken quietly over a drink to a journalist. But those 6 words contain everything. The entire rivalry. The entire philosophical debate about how war should be fought. The entire conflict between doctrine and results. That's anyone who knows Bernard Montgomery understands that. It's not an endorsement of Patton's methods. It's the closest Bernard Montgomery ever came to admitting that George Patton's chaos, his disregard for boundaries and doctrine and proper procedure, had achieved something that Montgomery's careful planning could not. The rivalry between these two men burned from Sicily to Germany. Personality clashes that nearly tore Allied command apart. Strategic disagreements that required Eisenhower to referee constantly. Ego conflicts that became legendary. They represented fundamentally different philosophies of war, different approaches to command, different beliefs about what mattered most. Montgomery believed in methodical preparation, overwhelming force at the decisive point, set-piece battles where every variable was controlled, everything planned down to the smallest detail, everything coordinated across all units, minimize risk, maximize certainty, win through preparation and superior resources. Patton believed in speed, aggression, exploitation, hit hard, move fast, keep the enemy, accept risk as the price of opportunity, create chaos for the enemy, win through tempo and violence of action. For 2 years, these philosophies collided. Montgomery thought Patton was reckless, dangerous, unprofessional, a cowboy playing soldier. Patton thought Montgomery was timid, overcautious, more interested in not losing than in winning. Eisenhower refereed, balanced, used both men according to their strengths, kept them focused on the mission instead of each other. And in April 1945, results delivered the verdict. Montgomery's methods were sound, professional. They worked. 12,000 Allied prisoners liberated through systematic operations. That's 12,000 lives saved, 12,000 men who went home, 12,000 families made whole again. That matters. That's significant. That's nothing to dismiss. But Patton's methods saved 32,000. The difference isn't doctrine. The difference isn't philosophy. The difference is 32,000 minus 12,000. 20,000 human beings, 20,000 prisoners who might have died in the chaos of the Reich's collapse. 20,000 men who saw American tanks and knew they were going home. 20,000 lives. That's not statistics, that's not numbers on a chart. That's 20,000 individual human beings, each one with a name, a family, a story, a life that continued because in April 1945, George Patton decided speed mattered more than orders. You've made your point. What Montgomery was really saying was this: I understand now. I don't like it. I don't approve of your methods. I think you're reckless and undisciplined and a danger to proper military structure. But I understand that your way, as infuriating as it is, as dangerous as it is, as impossible as it should be, saves more lives. You've proven it, with 32,000 pieces of evidence. You've made your point. I still think you're wrong, but you've made your point. Montgomery never said it publicly. He never praised Patton's April operations in official statements. He never endorsed the methods. In his 1958 memoirs, published 13 years after the war, Montgomery writes, Patton's methods in April 1945 were unorthodox and created operational difficulties for theater command. However, the liberation of prisoners was achieved with remarkable speed. One cannot argue with results of that magnitude, even if one questions the methods employed to achieve them. That's as close as Bernard Montgomery ever got to admitting George Patton was qualified with criticisms, hedged with concerns about precedent. But that one sentence to a journalist, spoken quietly over a drink in an officers' club on April 20th, 1945, said everything that needed to be said. You've made your point. So what happened afterward? What were the consequences of this extraordinary 2-week period? Third Army's final count: 32,000 Allied POWs liberated in April 1945, plus the liberation of Buchenwald, one of the most infamous concentration camps in the Nazi system. Buchenwald held political prisoners, resistance fighters, Jews, Soviet POWs, and others targeted by Nazi ideology. When American forces arrived on April 11th, they found thousands of prisoners barely alive. Patton ordered every unit in the area to tour the camp. He wanted his soldiers to see what they were fighting against. Plus Flossenburg concentration camp, liberated April 23rd. Plus dozens of subcamps and work camps scattered across central Germany. Plus forced march columns intercepted on roads as the Nazis tried to move prisoners away from advancing Allied forces. Total advance in the final month of the war, 240 miles. 6 major rivers crossed under combat conditions. Hundreds of towns and cities liberated. Wehrmacht resistance destroyed or bypassed. The logistics were nearly impossible. Third Army consumed fuel at rates that exceeded all projections. Maintenance requirements should have slowed the advance significantly. The combination of combat operations and humanitarian operations should have reduced overall tempo by at least 30% according to staff calculations. But Patton's logistics officers found ways. Emergency supply, forward supply dumps, captured German fuel stocks, creative solutions to impossible problems. British 21 Army groups total for the same period, approximately 12,000 POWs liberated, achieved over a larger geographic area, significant resistance overcome at Bremen and Hamburg. Major cities secured through deliberate combined arms operations, both saved lives, both contributed to ending the war, but the numbers spoke for themselves. 32,000 versus 12,000, with roughly equal force strength, with roughly equal opportunities. The difference wasn't resources. The difference was philosophy. The difference was tempo. The difference was pattern. The diplomatic consequences Eisenhower feared never fully materialized. Stalin was annoyed that American forces had approached the demarcation line aggressively, but the war was ending. The alliance held. The agreed boundaries were ultimately respected. Churchill, privately, was delighted that British POWs were freed quickly. He sent a personal message to Eisenhower: "Please convey to General Patton my appreciation for the liberation of British personnel. His methods may be unorthodox, but his results speak eloquently." Even Churchill, who had supported Montgomery throughout the war, couldn't argue with 32,000 lives saved. The German Reich collapsed. May 7, 1945, Admiral Karl Dönitz, Hitler's successor, authorized the unconditional surrender. Germany ceased to exist as a military power. The war in Europe ended. George Patton never apologized for April 1945. Why would he? 32,000 lives. That was his justification, his defense, his answer to every criticism. When staff officers raised concerns about logistics, he pointed to the liberation numbers. When Sheff questioned his authority, he pointed to the freed prisoners. When Montgomery criticized his methods, he pointed to the 4,000 British soldiers going home. 32,000 lives, that was the answer to everything. Bernard Montgomery never publicly praised Patton's operations, but he never publicly criticized them after April 20th either. The numbers made criticism impossible. How do you criticize a man for saving too many lives too quickly? Eisenhower, in his post-war memoir Crusade in Europe, published in 1948, writes about Patton. His bold, audacious operations in the final months of the war saved countless lives and materially shortened the conflict. His methods were unorthodox. His personality was difficult to manage. His disregard for boundaries created diplomatic complications, but his results were undeniable. History will judge him not by the orders he ignored, but by the lives he saved. That's high praise from a supreme commander who spent 2 years managing Patton's personality and defending his actions to political leaders. Here's the thing about April 1945 that often gets lost in the strategy and the rivalry and the command disputes and the diplomatic complications of the 32,000 POWs Third Army liberated. Over 4,000 were British Commonwealth soldiers. Many had been prisoners since Dunkirk, 1940. 5 years in captivity. 5 years of wondering if they'd ever go home. 5 years of watching friends die of disease, malnutrition, and brutality. 5 years of hoping someone would come. When American tanks rolled up to those camps and those forced march columns, when soldiers jumped down and cut the locks and shouted, "You're free," those British soldiers didn't care about doctrine. They didn't care about operational boundaries. They didn't care that Patton had exceeded his authority. They didn't care about the debate between Montgomery and Patton. They cared that the Americans came fast, that they didn't wait, that they prioritized speed over procedure, that they kept coming, camp after camp, day after day, until they found everyone. When their soldiers were repatriated to Britain, when they told their stories to families and journalists and eventually historians, they talked about the Americans who liberated them. They talked about Third Army. They talked about how fast they moved, how they seemed to appear out of nowhere, how one day there were guards and fences and death, and the next day there were American tanks and freedom and life. And many of those soldiers said the same thing. They came for us. They didn't wait for orders. They didn't wait for perfect conditions. They didn't wait for coordination. They just came, and they saved us. That was George Patton's legacy in April 1945, not the rivalry with Montgomery, not the diplomatic headaches, not the command disputes, not the headlines. 32,000 men who went home because one general decided that saving lives mattered more than following orders. Bernard Montgomery understood that, eventually, reluctantly. In a quiet moment with a drink in his hand, speaking to a journalist he trusted, he acknowledged it. You've made your point. 3 decades later, military historians still debate Patton's methods. Was he a genius who understood operational tempo better than anyone? Was he reckless and lucky? Was he both? The arguments continue in staff colleges and war colleges around the world. They teach Montgomery's careful planning. They teach Patton's aggressive exploitation. They teach both as valid, context-dependent, situation-specific, mission-dependent. But in April 1945 in central Germany, with camps full of dying prisoners, and the Reich collapsing into chaos and the war entering its final days, there was only one approach that saved the maximum number of lives in the minimum amount of time. And Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery, architect of El Alamein, architect of Market Garden, architect of careful set-piece battles, guardian of proper procedure and military doctrine, admitted it. You've made your point. Patton didn't win the rivalry. Neither did The rivalry wasn't the point. The rivalry never mattered except to their egos and the people who had to manage them. The point was that 32,000 men went home. The point was that families were reunited. The point was that prisoners who thought they were going to die in German camps instead lived to see peace. That was the point. That was always the point. And decades later, the grandchildren and great-grandchildren of those men grew up, lived lives, had families, built careers, experienced joy and sorrow and everything human. They existed because in April 1945, George Patton didn't wait for permission. He didn't wait for perfect coordination. He didn't wait for ideal conditions. He just went. Fast, aggressive, relentless, until everyone was free. Bernard Montgomery understood that. In his own way, in his own time. with his own reluctant admission. You've made your point. 6 words, spoken quietly, over a drink, to a journalist. On April 20th, 1945, 6 words that ended the debate. That acknowledged the truth. That admitted, however reluctantly, that sometimes chaos saves more lives than order. Sometimes speed matters more than doctrine. Sometimes results matter more than procedure. Sometimes one difficult, aggressive, impossible general saves 32,000 lives. And sometimes that's all that matters. If this story revealed something about World War II you never knew before, something about leadership and courage and the cost of saving lives, do me a favor. Subscribe to WW2 Elite. Hit that like button. Drop a comment telling me which general story you want to hear next. Which battle, which decision, which moment when one person changed everything. We're building a community that refuses to let these stories disappear into footnotes and statistics. These were real people, real decisions, real consequences, and their stories deserve to be told. I'll see you in the next one.